Welcome to the Mock Turtle 2021. Dear reader, the last time there were this many cicadas everywhere, I was a grubby little 1-year-old, just learning to walk and still not speaking coherent sentences. I can't remember, but I assume that I was probably fascinated, or at the very least oblivious to all of the creatures that suddenly emerged from the ground. Now I'm conscious of them. Their deafening drone in the trees around my backyard, and my dog trying to feed them every time we take them on a walk. How the kids who babysit like to drop their discarded exoskeletons on my back. It all makes me a little jealous of my unbothered 1-year-old self. But I guess that's the way things go. We grow up, stop being oblivious, and start noticing the world. That's why I think we turn to art and creativity. I know that for me, writing is how I process getting older and my own transition from oblivion to awareness. In this year's edition of the Mock Turtle, you'll find an array of photography, painting, poetry, prose, and other art forms that I think give a little insight into the different ways we see the world at this stage in our lives. So pause, take note. Who are you at this moment? Are you painfully aware of the cicadas crawling around just outside, or still a little oblivious to their existence? Do you welcome them with fascination and appreciation, or do you, like me, wish they would disappear? In another 17 years, we'll be completely different people in entirely new stages of our lives with changed outlooks on the world. This year's Mock Turtle is dedicated to who we are at this moment, to the people we will become in the next 17 years, and to the cicadas for their return from the ground.
Excerpt from Theories by Sophie Von Cohen. Your son has been misbehaving himself. We have brought this to your attention and to his, and yet this behavior has continued. We will no longer tolerate it at our school. Furthermore, we recommend a military school to get your son's disobedience under control. We will email you a list of recommendations shortly. Now, please remove yourself from the premises. Thank you. Lindsay finished her story, and the circle of solemn 6- and 7-year-olds were silent for a while as we mentally repeated the theory. There was something very unsettling about a classmate as smart as Jason being shipped off to military school just for joking around a bit. Sure, he disrupted class, but he was a funny guy and never mean the way some of the other kids were. And then he was gone.
Maiden Made Monster by Katie Ladakis. How many times has this story been said? Morgan-burst goddess, villainous viper, historically hair-raising. At first she was flawless, till Green grasped her, and gave her name Fear. Fear of being godless. Regardless of logic, labeled the girl mutineer. To cast a spell on a pretty face, and change hair to snakes and skin to scales. Projected Green unto another. And what was the irrevocable result? The venomous monster prevails, punished for being ravaged, and the beloved god walks away completely undamaged. How many times has this story been said? A boundless repetition.
Excerpt of What We See in the Dark by Anonymous. I hated waiting around at the mall, so I got lucky when my mom decided to do returns without us. Now my dad and I could go to the fun stores together. He looked down at me, took my hand, and asked, "Where do you want to go?" The Lego store, obviously. It was the best place in the mall, and even if we wouldn't buy anything, we would watch all the Lego people in the displays. And my dad always played around with me. He would point at the glass and ask me to name each one. After stopping at the mall directory, we made our way to the store. The mall had blue and green floor tiles, and I hopped from tile to tile like a frog jumping across lily pads. A man from a kiosk offered us a perfume sample, but my dad nudged me to walk forward. I never understood why my parents would turn down free stuff. Suddenly, my hand was jerked to the right, and my whole body was pulled with it. My dad scolded me. "You have to watch where you're going, kid. You almost ran into that man." But I wasn't really listening because my eyes were caught on something else.
Excerpt from The Last Man in the World. The last man in the world sat alone in a room. How long you been in there anyway? Murphy leaned back in an ugly mustard-colored chair. Just a recipe for a bad back. Joe sighed. He sat a couple of feet away from Murphy in an identical chair. Man, I got no idea. Joe pulled out 2 cigarettes from the back pocket of his khakis and motioned an impatient hand towards Murphy, quickly found his lighter and tossed it to Joe's waiting palm. Well, if you had to guess, what'd you say? Joe pressed the end of the cigarette between his chapped lips and flipped the ignition until a bright orange flame danced along the end. He carefully took 2 fingers and made a V shape, bringing the cigarette out of his mouth and releasing a puff of smoke that formed a foggy cloud around his bald head. He fixed Murphy with an annoyed side glance before tossing the lighter and the second cigarette. Joe knew Murphy couldn't help his curiosity. He was a newbie. The newbies always wanted to know everything there was to know about the last man in the world.